some analysis. We're joined in studio now by Douglas Yates, Professor of Political Science at the American Graduate School here in Paris. Thanks so much for coming in to us this morning, Douglas. Firstly, you're an expert and a specialist in African politics. Maybe tell us why this visit is coming now. Is it a coincidence that it comes so soon after Sergei Lavrov was in Africa?
No, there's a very clear intention to send Antony Blinken. It's been prepared for months to reset U.S. foreign policy towards sub-Saharan Africa, reset relations with South Africa, and also get more deeply involved in the conflict in the Central Africa region. So this was clearly an effort by the United States to try to counter malign Russian action in Africa, action that's designed to undermine democracy. Even though these countries, Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda, are themselves not paragons of democracy, the alternative in that region are military regimes and guerrillas and blood diamonds.
And Blinken, he's heading to the third country on that three-nation tour. How successful has he been so far?
Well, his speech in South Africa was successful in that it established an actual African policy of the U.S. government. During the Trump administration, we didn't have one. You may have remembered Trump's comments about African countries being S-hole nations, and there was no African policy during Trump. So Blinken's second trip now to the continent has established the Biden administration, the U.S. is back in Africa. But as far as actually accomplishing objectives, a real success would have been Cyril Ramaphosa's condemning Russia for the invasion of Ukraine, didn't get that, and a real success in this conflict in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo would be a meeting of the two heads of state mediated by Antony Blinken. He didn't achieve that either, not for the moment.
Well, you've mentioned Russian influence there. Now, we heard, and in particular, we mentioned earlier the Iranian satellite that's been launched. Russia, it is trying to increase its influence in Africa, particularly since the start of the war. How successful has that been? And also in terms of what it's doing to try to undermine democracy, more broadly speaking, on the continent.
Yeah, so there's certain countries in sub-Saharan Africa where Russia has a big influence. Central African Republic, Mali. In those countries, you could say Russia has succeeded in both implanting its mercenaries, Wagner, but also in capturing the airwaves and implanting Russian propaganda, anti-Western, anti-French, and anti-American. Elsewhere on the continent, things are still at play. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union tried to play out its African hand, but it always had a difficult time making long-term commitments. And when the Cold War came to an end, Russia withdrew. Russia right now is aggressively trying to expand its influence in the African continent to get votes in the UN, to be able to have countries not participate in the anti-Russian bloc, but it doesn't really have the resources. It has hard power. It has Wagner, which, although Vladimir Putin denies it, does act on behalf of the Kremlin. But name like one Russian development project in the entire continent, and you won't find it. Russia doesn't have a comprehensive multilateral policy, and that's its main weakness in this war with the West.
And Douglas, why do you think so many countries in Africa, they appear reluctant to come off the fence when it comes to what's happening in Ukraine and the support, whether or not they have it for Russia or whether they're supporting Kyiv?
Well, there'll be particular answers. South Africa is a member of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And so that's been a kind of anti-hegemonic, non-aligned movement that's been going on since George W. Bush. Other countries like Mali and Central African Republic rely entirely on Russian mercenaries for their security. They're going to toe the line. And yet there's a large trend in Africa to see America as an arrogant power, France as a neo-colonial power, and with the internet, anti-Western messages are gaining currency in the African street. All of this adds up to a reluctance to take sides, but if this new Cold War continues, that will not remain an option.
And in terms of the detail of the visit, so Blinken is heading to Rwanda today. That country has been in a long-running dispute with Congo, particularly when it comes to the M23 rebels. What kind of a difference does it make to have the US Secretary of State visiting Rwanda when it comes to those inter-country conflicts that have been going on for so long?
Well, I happen to be of the belief that on the surface, this trip is to act for mediating, but behind the surface, this is trying to fulfill House Resolution 7311, a bipartisan bill that was passed in the House that tasked the Secretary of State to try to counter Russian influence. So what difference will it make in the conflict? Not much, because that conflict is about blood coltan. But what difference will it make in setting up a new strategy to counter Russian influence? In the region where the U.S. during the Cold War had Mobutu, had its main influence, I think it will do a lot.
Okay, so there's a lot to keep an eye on as that visit continues. Douglas Yates, thanks you so much for coming into studio this morning, specialist in African policy and also professor of political science at the American Graduate School here in Paris. Thanks so much for your time this morning.